We're coming to you from the DraftKings.com podcasting studios. DraftKings.com, America's one-day fantasy sports site, where it's like a new season every time you play. DraftKings.com.
From ESPN's Pod Center, this is NBA Lockdown.
Welcome into another edition of the NBA Lockdown podcast alongside Doug Kezirian. I'm Jorge Sedano. Coming up in a little bit, maybe some apologies to Blake Griffin and the Clippers, as we all may have buried them a little too soon, potentially. We'll get to that in just a moment, plus some news out of the LaMarcus Aldridge free agency camp. But first, we start off with the Cavs and the Celtics. Got a little physical there yesterday, and there's been some choice words going back and forth, and we'll get the latest from ESPN Cleveland's Tony Cartagena, who joins us now here on the NBA Lockdown podcast. Tony, what do we know about J.R. Smith's potential suspension? Is it one game? Is it multiple games? And what are we hearing about Kevin Love's injury as well? What's the latest, I guess, in regards to the prognosis?
Well, let's start with Kevin Love. He was diagnosed with a dislocated left shoulder yesterday during the game. The Cavs released that midway through the third quarter, and he was unable to receive further evaluation until the team got back from Boston to Cleveland last night. He was evaluated, and I think we're just waiting on the results of an MRI. The word inside the Cavaliers organization is that this should be about a 2-week injury for Kevin Love, setting him back 2 weeks. In the regular season, Iman Shumpert had the exact same injury this year, and it was on his non-shooting shoulder, and he was traded to the Cavaliers while he was still rehabbing, and he missed a total of 6 weeks. But I think a little more urgency with it being in the playoffs, a little more, I need to get back on the court, and it sounds like that's where Kevin Love is. We're still awaiting an official statement from the team, but either way, it looked ugly right from the get-go, and then the retaliation with J.R. Smith, I just saw come across here that Jay Crowder of the Boston Celtics was diagnosed with a sprained left ACL, and I'm not sure how much of an effect that has on the suspension and, if they look into what injuries his actions caused. But, looking at some of the past suspensions in the NBA, you remember a couple of years ago, Meta World Peace resorted to being Ron Artest and cracked James Harden in the face with an elbow, and he got 6 games in the playoffs. I don't know if this is as malicious as that, but I am expecting 3, maybe 5 games. It's a tough call. J.R. Smith has the history. Yesterday was 2 years ago to the exact date where when he was on offense and he hit Jason Terry in the face with an elbow when it was Knicks versus Celtics. So he's got the history. Adam Silver is probably going to come down on him for, his past actions. And like you said yesterday, he was nervous as hell to hear what the suspension was going to be, because I think he knows that he's 100% in the wrong and is going to deserve whatever comes down on him.
How's the team going to move on and play, whether it was likely the Bulls, we think, with these guys sidelined for a couple games? Look, it's no secret that Kevin Love hasn't been the ideal fit for the Cavaliers, but he was certainly effective, and the statistics will show you that as well in this Celtics series. So how does this team survive or function? What does it look like without both those guys?
Speculating that both of those guys will be out, I would say, Sean Marion started some games earlier in the season. I would expect them to move him back into the starting lineup so they can, just keep some continuity with what comes off the bench. I think Tristan Thompson and Iman Shumpert are great coming off the bench. They get a chance, and they'll tell you they get a chance to look at the defense, look at the offense, and go out there to know exactly what they're going to do. So I would think James Jones and Sean Marion get inserted into the starting lineup here and just try to give as many quality minutes as they can. And you said, how do they get past the Bulls? I think that's a huge if they can get past the Bulls, because they're losing a lot of size with Kevin Love. They're losing in the playoffs. It was 19-9 points and rebounds for Kevin Love in the first 3 games. The regular season, it was 16-10. I mean, Kevin Love, people can say he's not the ideal fit. I completely understand that, but he's also a very underappreciated player. He gets you those scrappy points. There's reasons that, he comes up with a scratched eye this year. There's reasons that he was hustling for a loose ball and Kelly Olynyk and him got tangled up, and he gets his arm basically ripped out of his socket a little bit. He's that type of player. He's not the flashiest guy in the world, but he makes a huge impact on the court. And I honestly think that his loss will be felt right from the get-go, whether it's Saturday or whether it's next week Monday that these teams are playing. I think the Cavs are going to realize what big of an impact Kevin Love had all season long.
Tony Cartagena, ESPN Cleveland, with us here on the NBA Lockdown podcast. Tony, thanks for the time, man. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So thanks to Tony Cartagena of ESPN Cleveland for joining us there. So I guess, Doug, the question is, do we think that it was intentional? It was dirty what Olynyk did? We all know how Kevin Love feels about it.
Well, I thought it was a bush league play. I mean, I was out there. Olynyk was in a compromising position, had no chance to get the ball, and it's just too bad that he would go to those lengths to take somebody out of the game and do that to someone. So I have no doubt in my mind that he did that on purpose.
I mean, listen, man. I'm not going to sit here and say that he did it on purpose. Like, I feel like that's silly. Like, I don't know. I'm not going to get in somebody's head. I will say this. I thought Rick Fox made great points on Twitter yesterday after the game where he talked about, look, guys get tied up all the time in those situations, and that's just the way it works. Sometimes, you end up dealing with injuries, but those type of tie-ups happen all the time. And there's even pictures, obviously, on the internet on that same play where Love is kind of trying to armbar him before we get to the point where then Olynyk grabs his arm and pulls away as they're trying to reach for the ball. Was it intentional? Okay, I would say this part was intentional. I don't think he wanted him to get the ball. Do I think it was dirty? Look, I think sometimes the playoffs can be dirty, but I just don't know if he thought while pulling him away that he was going to rip his arm out of his socket. I don't think there was malicious intent there necessarily in regards to that.
I think I agree. A lot of this is semantics, but basically, in the playoffs, especially as a series goes on, this isn't game one, there's been some back and forth throughout a series. I totally agree that it wasn't premeditated. I don't think Olynyk is like, all right, I'm going down swinging here in this game. But I think you touched on the shot of Kevin Love first sort of initiating that physical play on that particular play. And then when you respond, you don't always respond equally. You respond sort of a one-up. So intentional, yeah, he was intending to get physical there, and he probably intended to have both arms in what we are calling an arm bar. But I don't think, and this is just pure speculation because I know nothing, that he was intending to dislocate the guy's shoulder. But I do think he was trying to one-up the previous locked arms on that possession. And I just think, sometimes it's a split second. A split second changes everything. Clevelanders certainly know that, given some torment in the past of their sports teams. And that's all it takes. And I think, he let go. And we saw Matt Barnes go into the first row of the photographers the other day. Even after the jump ball was called, they kept wrestling through things. And that's what these guys do. We forget how athletic they are, how intense things are. And, we sit in the comfort of our home, watch these games with the perfect ambiance. And these guys are going at it, and they're going out at it against other professional players.
I will say this, without having seen, the original tie-up before what transpired at the end, I think it's easy to jump to conclusions there. But once you've seen the totality of it, I think that it just makes sense that, hey, look, this is just the way it works. And as you pointed out, with some retaliation, I do think that Cleveland fan is a little hypersensitive here based on their history in sports here, basically for the last, 40, 50 years. So I think that plays a role in it as well. And I don't blame them for feeling that way because, if I was living through that, I'd probably be a little hypersensitive too. But I will say this, moving forward here, I don't think this is going to hurt them as much as some people think, even against Chicago. I just think LeBron will elevate his level of play some more. I think Kyrie can take it to a different level too. And I think they could still beat the Bulls. They kind of owned the Bulls this season. And I know Derrick Rose is playing better. And he did have the boneheaded play at the end of that last game. And he was obviously he's been pretty good in this series, better than I think most of us anticipated. But I don't think that the Bulls' defense is as good as it once was.
Nowhere close.
Statistically it doesn't bear that out. And their offense is good, but I don't think their offense is good enough where it's going to make Cleveland pay for it on defense, even though Cleveland's not great on defense either. I think potentially that if this Love injury lingers, then I think it could hurt them moving forward into the conference finals if they meet in Atlanta or someone like that. Because I just don't see James Jones and Tristan Thompson and Sean Marion being able to guard if Paul Millsap is healthy, a healthy Paul Millsap and Al Horford and those guys, I think that becomes a problem. Those have been some issues for them during the regular season with that team and the way they move the ball. But I'm not really sold on Chicago can beat Cleveland, even if JR misses a couple of games and Love misses a couple of games.
I am. I actually am. I think Tony brought up some great points. Kevin Love has not been as flashy or whatever, but he's a huge piece, and it's a trickle-down effect. I mean, does that mean Kendrick Perkins is going to get first-half minutes like he did yesterday? It's a giant eyesore out there. And, I mean, Joakim Noah, you mentioned defensively, he is nowhere near the former Defensive Player of the Year that he should be. Health-wise. And I just think the Bulls, the difference is they still have Jimmy Butler to bother LeBron, but then they have so much offensive firepower that they can match Kyrie and LeBron going off. And, yes, James Jones is going to hit some threes. He's not going to miss all the open looks like he did yesterday. But I think defensively there's giant liabilities, and, the Bulls obviously much more effective on offense than the Celtics had.
Well, look, I think it becomes a much tougher grind for Cleveland. I think all of a sudden that's potentially a 7-game series now, whereas before I think Cleveland would have won in 6 pretty easily, in my opinion. But now it becomes more of a toss-up. I still don't think that Chicago has enough to beat them because we've seen Derrick Rose kind of yo-yo here, up and down, up and down, up and down. So, you're not getting enough consistency. And as we mentioned, the defense not as good as it once was. I do think that at some point the minutes start to wear on guys like Pau Gasol and whatnot. And I just don't know. What do you do if you're Chicago defensively if they do go small and they got James Jones and LeBron at the 4? LeBron was as destructive a force as there was in the NBA, specifically when he was playing the 4, when he was with Miami. He was a far more efficient player with the Heat those last couple of years because he was playing the 4 position a lot and getting in the post and creating from others out of the post. I don't see Pau Gasol being able to defend LeBron out of the post. So I think that becomes a problem for Chicago. Then what are you going to do? Put Mirotic out there? Taj Gibson? I think LeBron eats them up if he ends up playing the 4 and they have James Jones at the 3. That's why I just don't think Chicago can beat them 4 out of 7, even without Kevin Love.
I've been guilty of assuming too much in the Bulls ever since the Bulls took Game 1 in the 2011 Eastern Conference Finals. I've been drinking the Bulls Kool-Aid, and they keep proving me wrong. So, I certainly can't fault you for thinking that. I do think they can match him, whether they put, Mirotic on James Jones because he just camps out and something like that. I think there's ways to counteract. I still think you want Butler guarding LeBron, and then if he gets in foul trouble, maybe Taj Gibson or Tony Snell can even obviously take his chances against LeBron. But no, obviously there's mismatches everywhere. But this is a big, big miss. If Kevin Love's out. Now, if it's only 2 weeks, okay, a couple games, we'll see. Yeah. But if it's like 4 or 6 weeks like Shumpert, then it's a bigger issue.
All right, let's get into this Spurs-Clippers series. Now, look, I'm not willing to sit here and say that I think the Spurs are done. I'm not going to put dirt on the coffin, as some people are putting out there. But what I will say this is, it's been a nightmare matchup for them. And it was probably the worst possible matchup they could have had in the first round. Amin and I talked about it last week. They're in real trouble, though. Parker's dinged up. Ginobili has become a kind of a turnover machine. And in this particular series, because of how spry and athletic the Clippers look, it makes the Spurs look a little older. Now, that may just be a matchup thing. I'm not willing to sit here and say, the Spurs are done, they're old, they can't come back. But we saw where injuries and age caught up to the Heat a little bit last year, and Kawhi's kind of carrying them right now. I don't know if that's enough. They're going to need games from these other guys. And we saw Duncan have that magnificent game, too. Maybe we need to see more from Tim. We need to see more from Tony. I don't know how much he can give them. Ginobili has to be able to stay on the court. I just think they need more. Meanwhile, by the way, Chris Paul has been fantastic. And there was a lot of talk about Blake, when he lost, quote unquote, the game in Game 2 in Los Angeles. But, I was trying to make the argument with Amin that, and he agreed with me, and I don't know how you felt about it, Doug, that I feel like we were putting blame on him unnecessarily. I think he put it on himself, but what the hell else is he supposed to do? Because he had the turnovers, but they wouldn't even have been in that game had it not been for him. But it's funny, all of a sudden, we had a game that, it was a game in the fourth quarter, and we're not talking about Blake blowing the game like some people say, that at the end of games he gets unraveled a little bit. I'm pretty impressed with the Clippers. And I'm gonna paraphrase what Amin said at the beginning of this series, which is this is a battle of attrition. The Clippers' top 6 guys in their rotation are really strong. Then the bench is not so great. I know we had a great performance from Austin Rivers yesterday, but that's kind of an outlier. And it's a battle of, can the Spurs stay healthy enough and their depth going to be able to overcome before the Clippers' wheels kind of come off because they're running basically 6-7 guys into the ground there. And I guess nobody really knows the answer, but we're about to find out. And I think it's going to turn out to be a 7-game series because of it.
Yeah, and that 7th game will go up against Mayweather-Pacquiao on Saturday night, which will be kind of funny. But as if that day needed any more big sporting events.
Right.
But
Right, the Kentucky Derby, too. Right now, there's so many things going on. Yeah.
I, too, am impressed with the Clippers. I've been knocking this team, so to speak, because they keep trying to take over L.A., and as a Laker fan, I'm going to be biased. But, let's just get to the conference finals because it's really hard to win in the playoffs. It's a different animal than Blake flying around and throwing down and blowing out some bad teams and then winning some big games in good spots. Like, you have to beat really good teams 4 out of 7 times in multiple rounds. And the Clippers are learning that. And yesterday showed me so much from the Clippers. That's a typical spot where they lose and just got demoralized in Game 3. Moving forward, do they have the chops to win this? They certainly – the situation's as advantageous for the Clippers as it could be going up against the 5-time champs, the defending champs. Like you said, Parker's dinged up. Everyone else just looks a little older, Ginobili particularly. But I still think the Spurs get it done. I think they're going to bounce back and win Game 5 and then take care of Game 6 at home. They just need to learn how to shoot on the road. Their three-point percentage at home is over 39%. That's second in the NBA for home three-point shooting percentage. It's 34 on the road. They got to hit shots and then just hope that either Blake or Chris Paul has a somewhat average game instead of both going off, because in Game 1 they both played spectacular. Yesterday they were both spectacular, and the Spurs need one of them not to do that.
All right, coming up next, we're going to get into some of these other series that are going down, plus LaMarcus Aldridge making some comments to, I don't know if we can call them even comments. He made one comment and kind of gave a wry smile about his impending free agency. We'll touch on that coming up next here on the NBA Lockdown Podcast. We'll be back in 60 seconds.
Geico presents Strange Savings Stories. Astronomers detected an interstellar transmission. It stated, Geico, 15 minutes could save you 15% or more. The implications were staggering. Was the cosmos telling us we could all save hundreds on car insurance with Geico? Or did their radar merely pick up a signal from the nearby Rufus and Clyde's morning show? We may never know.
Geico, 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance.
Welcome back into the NBA Lockdown Podcast. Alongside Doug Kezirian, I'm Jorge Sedano. So, LaMarcus Aldridge, maybe not so much about what he did say, but what he didn't say. Our Chris Broussard approached LaMarcus Aldridge recently and asked him about the Mark Stein report about his future in Portland, and asked him point blank, hey, is Portland still the favorite here? And I'm paraphrasing. And LaMarcus's answer was, we'll see, with a wry smile. If I'm Portland, I don't know how I feel about that necessarily. And look, man, there are a lot of guys who think the grass is greener on the other side, but Darren Williams is one of those examples. Ooh, man, sometimes you don't really appreciate what you have until it's gone, man.
About 3 months ago, I laughed at the thought of LaMarcus Aldridge not re-signing with the Blazers. Now I'm like, wow, I have no idea, because, look, the Lakers are going to open up their checkbooks. The Knicks have an open checkbook, and I think the Knicks situation you could put some pieces together, make it a little bit more desirable when you factor in the marketing opportunities. And who knows what happens in some others. He's a Texas native. Rockets.
Yeah, Spurs and Mavericks will have money.
Spurs, yeah. I mean, you never know. And we know the Rockets can make any sort of trade to create space. So it's definitely much more undecided. And when you see, if you get swept like they could tonight, and you're like, maybe I just don't have the pieces around me. Yes, Damian Lillard's great, and we had a nice bench, and we can chalk it up to injuries. But when there's that much, this is a huge stretch of his career, and I think he's definitely open-minded. Let's just put it that way. He's going to be going on dates.
Yeah, and I guess he should, right? I mean, any of us would in that situation, but it certainly isn't going to ease the Portland fans' nerves at this point. But you know what? They may be able to get back in this series, potentially, because of Mike Conley's injury. This all of a sudden kind of makes things look a lot different. Now, I don't think they can win the series, but it certainly changes the landscape here a little, doesn't it?
Well, last year, the Blazers were down 3-0 to the Spurs, I believe, and then did win Game 4. The bench was a big part of that, and then they went and got rolled in San Antonio in Game 5. So we've seen some teams roll over 3-0. I'm looking at you, Toronto. And then we've also seen other teams come back and make it a series, so to speak, and that was like Dallas last night. So I would put Portland in the we still try, we still care, we're going to give it our all mindset, so I would expect at least effort out of them. But I'm not willing to. I think they're going up against a team that's, I don't want to call it a machine because they haven't done anything really, but there's a system where Mike Conley is great, and he's, we label him the most underrated point guard in the league, but I still think there's a scenario where Memphis gets this win.
Listen, I'm with you. I think they can win one. I don't think they win the series. I think that the problem is now with Memphis moving forward, like, what to even expect from them. I guess there's a lot of unknown here, so I'm not going to sit here and speculate what to expect from them. But yeah, it just shows you how much injuries play a factor in these postseasons and this entire season. Really, it's just kind of been a constant theme, and the playoffs have been no different. Let's move forward here to the Dallas and Houston series. Now, that's another series. You talked about guys laying down or whatnot. Now, they scored a ton of points in Game 3. They ended up losing that game. They come back. They win yesterday, the Mavericks, that is. J.J. Barea gets inserted into the starting lineup. Al-Farouq Amino gets inserted into the starting lineup. They pay dividends. Tyson Chandler, all of a sudden, has a resurgence of sorts. I mean, they were minus 51 in the first 3 games when he was on the floor. They were plus 26 yesterday when he was on the floor, and he created all sorts of problems for them defensively. They were shooting 53% when he was on the floor before. It was 37% yesterday. I don't know if that was just an outlier situation or if all of a sudden this thing is starting to shift a little bit. I'll say this. I don't expect Houston to lose this series, but if they lose Game 5, then all of a sudden all bets are off. All of a sudden I can honestly sit here and tell you that Dallas has a legit shot. Now, I don't know how many, again, I don't know how much gas those guys have left in the tank because Dirk has been up and down in this series too, and as we've obviously documented Tyson Chandler's struggles here in this series as well. But I'm not willing to write them off. If they win Game 5, then that changes the dynamic of the series potentially. But obviously Houston is still in the driver's seat and should win this series here. I think they should just wrap this thing up in the next game.
Well, I said this before when it was 3-0. I was like, this does not feel 3-0, and if there's ever going to be a team that comes back from down 3-0, it's the Mavericks in this series because they have a good coach. They got rid of the Rondo issue. I've been saying Rajon Rondo is like the 3rd or 4th best point guard on his own team. Right. And, look what Carlisle did. He pushed the right buttons, and games 2 and 3 were really close. I mean, if it weren't for the alley-oop fest in Game 2, 4th quarter, who knows what happens in that game. And like you said, Dallas was up at halftime in Game 3. So the Mavericks have the horses to pull this off, and the Rockets have just the right amount of knuckleheads to blow this. I'm not expecting it to happen, but it would not shock me if the Mavericks get back into this series and maybe even take it all the way to 7.
The Mavericks ended with a 34% offensive rebounding percentage, which is pretty damn good. 16 offensive rebounds led to 20 second-chance points. Meanwhile, the Rockets only had 4 such points. I mean, Dwight Howard started great in that game, and then it was just like gone. Like he disappeared to an extent. And honestly, Josh Smith was the guy that got them back in that game, which was kind of surprising how well he's played in this series for the most part. Honestly, I'm happy for him, but it's certainly not what I expected to be, Josh Smith being the X factor potentially in this series. He had the obvious game, back in Houston, but even yesterday, he kind of made it a game late. I had turned the game off, and I flipped back just at the end just to see what was going on, and then all of a sudden, it was within reach. It was a 10-point game with 4 minutes to go, so I stuck with it. But, yeah, I would be floored if Houston lost this series at this point. But stranger things have certainly happened. Well, actually, no. Now that I think about it, no. Stranger things have not happened because no team has ever come back down 3-0. So, right. Sorry. I don't
We've seen Houston blow 2-0, though, in a best of 5.
We have, but, 3-0? Like, it's never happened. Like, I don't – listen, man.
With Josh Smith involved and some of the other guys, Dwight Howard, I won't put anything past these guys. I really won't.
Man. No, I'm not willing to say it. I'm not willing. I think could they push it to 6 or 7? Maybe. Look, obviously, if they win the next game, then it really becomes intriguing. But I just don't see that happening. I see Houston just kind of closing this thing out here. Listen, KG. Not anything is possible when it hasn't been possible before. Okay, it would be unprecedented. That would not be anything is possible, actually. All right. Last thing here, Wizards and Toronto. You mentioned Toronto kind of taking a subtle jab at them. I'm surprised Josh didn't give you a hate hard in honor of Amin, who's not here today.
Hashtag hate hard.
A little delayed hate hard. That's fine. So, here's the thing. I don't think enough is being said about Kyle Lowry dealing with injuries here down the stretch. I think that plays a huge role. I also, at the beginning of the series, just didn't feel like they had enough to win, to be really dangerous in the playoffs. I think that they reminded me of some of the Denver Nugget teams who had good regular seasons, and in the postseason, they were just okay. These guys weren't even okay, but I think more of that was due to injury with Lowry than anything else. I expect some sort of shakeup. I think Masai Ujiri is one of the smartest general managers we have in the sport, so I expect them to correct that in some way, shape, or form. But I do think the Wizards, even though they looked very good in that series, and John Wall looked good, and Bradley Beal and Paul Pierce had moments, I think that they may have looked better because their opponent wasn't very good. That if I was looking at the top 4 or 5 seeds, 6 seeds even in the Eastern Conference, I'd probably venture to say that Toronto was the weakest of those top 6 seeds. And I just feel like Washington will kind of come down to earth a little bit in the next round.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, the Wizards have warts, right? You don't want.
Well, you love them. You love them. Remember, we had this conversation a few months ago. You were big on the Wizards.
Well, I was putting them, top 8? I think top 8 overall.
You were absolutely putting them there.
Well, I mean, I don't love their coach, but I certainly love some of their personnel. And look, Toronto's not horrendous, but they just didn't play well. And I think their offense. I think their bigs are offensively challenged. I think they're just too raw and not polished enough. Love Kyle Lowry, but I've been touching on the last couple of weeks on the podcast about how he just doesn't look right. We all assume he's right because the playoffs are starting, but those back spasms, that was certainly a factor. And then Ross and DeRozan are unreliable. Now, they had injuries during the regular season. Who knows how much of those are still lingering? I totally agree. The Raptors weren't the best, but they weren't exactly like a bad opponent, and they had home court, and the Wizards made them look silly. But the Wizards did this last year. They won in the first round. Second round had the advantage over the Pacers, and then their lack of offensive system and creativity reared its ugly head, and they just ran up against a team that was better coached and made the plays. And I worry.
Right. I worry and that's what's potentially.
Yeah, exactly. I worry that's going to happen again.
Yeah, and that's what's potentially going to happen here because I know that Brooklyn won the last game, but I don't see Atlanta losing that series, and I think that's going to be the case again.
Yes, I do think they're going to face Atlanta, and Atlanta's system is just going to run circles around them. But I'm telling you, the Wizards have some really – if Wall and Beal can go off and the bigs can give them something, it's a really, really hard team to beat.
Yeah. I just don't know. I think that Toronto, this version of what we saw with Toronto, wasn't very healthy. And I don't think that we saw the best Toronto, even though I wasn't very high on them coming into the postseason. I just think that the Wizards, yes, Beal and Wall have a ton of upside still, I think. I still think they have another gear to go to potentially as a group and as a unit, specifically Beal. I think we're seeing some of the best of John Wall here now. But I don't trust Nene on a regular basis. I don't trust Gortat. And I know Pierce has looked good in this postseason for the most part, but I think at some point age catches up with him as well. And I think that Atlanta scheme, because that's who we think they're going to end up playing, sorry, Brooklyn, I think becomes a problem for him on defense a little bit. And I know Otto Porter had a nice series here. He had some moments. I just don't think they have enough to beat Atlanta. Honestly, I think Atlanta would beat them in 6 games, to be quite honest with you. But I think that coaching is a problem. I think, especially when you see them late in games, I wonder why. For example, I saw them. I'm trying to think. It was late in the regular season.
Pacers.
Yes. I saw them play a game against the Pacers where Bradley Beal's holding the ball at the top of the key, and you have John Wall spotting up at the elbow or in the corner. And I'm thinking to myself, why? Why would anyone respect John Wall from out there? And that to me is all on coaching. And it's just things like that make me think if they play Atlanta, they've got no shot because I don't trust Whitman. And I just think defensively they're not as good as maybe they looked in this particular series against Toronto.
That's totally fair. But hats off to Paul Pierce and his game of trolling.
Oh, he's fantastic. Look, he is. Look, I want him around for as long as he can possibly be around in this league just for that alone. I just think he brings some showmanship to the game, some entertainment to the game. And at the end of the day, they're games. We should be able to have fun.
Exactly. And we complain that these guys are too cookie cutter with some of their cliches, and he's bringing it on social media as well. But I will say the difference between this year and last year for Paul Pierce, when age did catch up with him last year with the Nets, is he was asked to do so much more for Brooklyn, particularly offensively, than he had to guard LeBron a little bit. I mean, it was just a ridiculous ask of him a year ago. This year, clearly he's a role player. He's a locker room guy, and then he's obviously ramping up his game in the postseason because he's got a lot more left in the tank as a product of the regular season.
All right, man, that'll do it for us here. Doug, always a pleasure, bud. Good hanging out with you.
Yeah, likewise.
That'll do it for us. Again, don't forget, NBA Lockdown Podcast every day, weekdays here on ESPN.com/PodCenter throughout the postseason. You guys enjoy the games, and we'll be back tomorrow. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to NBA Lockdown on ESPN Radio. For more great podcasts, check out the PodCenter page on ESPNRadio.com.